after reportedly sleeping with over 20,000 women, Wilt Chamberlain died alone. But even after growing up in a large and interesting family, why did he never start a family of his own? And how did having 10 siblings and multiple friends impact who he would become? I'm Jesse with Basketball Dive, and this is the family of the legendary Wilt Chamberlain.
World mourning the passing of one of the NBA's greatest legends.
Wilt was a giant, and we all know that, but growing up he was a skinny and frail kid who actually almost died of pneumonia that put him out of school for 12 months. But the fact that he was frail or fragile as a kid was not why he was called Wilt, so don't start getting any ideas now. He was born Wilton Norman Chamberlain on August 21st, 1936 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And from what he and everybody says, he had wonderful parents. And let's meet them. First, let's meet his father, William Chamberlain, from whom Wilt picked up his jack-of-all-trades personality. Wilt's father, William Chamberlain, shouldn't be confused with the other basketball player William Martin Chamberlain, who was born in 1949 and played for the Phoenix Suns, if you're a little sports fanatic there, or the baseball player William Vincent Chamberlain, or the politician William... you know what, there are quite a few famous William Chamberlains out there, so let's just move on for the one that you came for. Wilt's father was born in Virginia in the United States in 1901. He had 9 siblings and was the son of Walter S. Chamberlain and Polly Owens Chamberlain, and that's according to WikiTree, which is a site where genealogists collaborate. And according to Wilt, his father was not nearly as tall as him, as he stood just 5'8" in height, which might be respectable in most families, but surprising in the family of a basketball star for sure. Nevertheless, William and his family lived at 401 North Salford Street in West Philadelphia, in a large brick house with a yard and a garage he rented out because he had no car. William didn't talk very much, but his words, when spoken, carried weight, according to one of his 6 daughters, Barbara. He was like that commercial, E.F. Hutton. When he talked, everybody listened. And according to Wilt's high school coach Cecil Mosison, Wilt's father was a nice but passive guy, yet he was still able to hold down many jobs, a trait he passed down to all of his children, but with which Wilt harnessed further. It is said that every one of his children had at least one job, even when they were still kids. Wilt on his part worked on lawns, gutters, and steps, and shoveled snow off sidewalks and driveways, and a couple of other side jobs every once in a while in addition to those. Wilt was just channeling his father's resourcefulness, who had worked as a welder, a custodian, and a handyman. William notably worked for Curtis Publishing, publishers of the Saturday Evening Post, as a custodian. He was good with his hands, not just for cleaning, but for fixing things for neighbors at a fair price. William reportedly married Olivia Ruth Johnson in 1928, and together they had 11 children, but unfortunately they lost 2 of them, so they were left with 9, 3 boys and 6 girls, including Wilt. William was not like most basketball fathers who influenced their children to start playing basketball. He was instead crazy about boxing, actually. A fact Barbara confirmed, quote, "No doubt about it, our parents were the greatest influence on his life. My parents were not into sports, except for boxing. My dad was a boxing fanatic." End quote. Maybe that was why Wilt picked up boxing in addition to his interests in swimming, basketball, high jump, and volleyball. But boxing fanatic or not, William was never in support of his son boxing the great Muhammad Ali. As much as he loved a good boxing match, William knew Ali was going to kick his son's butt for sure, so he told him he would not be going through with the match. Barbara once again provided the details when she said, quote, "He's just watching Wilt, never saying a word until it came to the point they almost signed the contract, and he said to him, 'You know you can't beat that boy, you will not be boxing him.' That's all he had to say, that was the end of it." End quote. But as far as I can tell, William supported his son's basketball dreams, and if not, he wouldn't have relocated his family to California when Wilt moved there in '63 to play for the Warriors team after the team was sold. However, William Chamberlain would die in California, unfortunately, 5 years later in 1968. He reportedly battled an undisclosed illness for quite some time. After his death, Wilt's mother had to move back to Philly, where she would have more family and friends around, and where William was passive and quiet, his wife Olivia was anything but. She was said to be in charge of everything in the Chamberlain household. Wilt's childhood friend Vincent Miller described Olivia as the rock around Wilt. Standing at 5 foot 9 inches tall, Olivia Ruth Chamberlain cared nothing about sports but supported her son's dreams nonetheless. Many years later, her daughter Barbara would tell Robert Cherry, writer of Wilt's biography Wilt, Larger Than Life, about what Olivia Chamberlain wanted most from her kids. Quote, "My mother could care less about sports. Her thing was to make sure we were polite, kind, and gracious. That's all she cared about. By the time Wilt came along, my parents were older. They didn't put a lot of emphasis on the fact that he ended up being famous. They just wanted him to walk down the street and speak politely to everyone." End quote. Olivia was born to Jacob John and Ellen Archer and had 2 siblings, Rosetta and Levi Johnson. Wikitree places her date of birth as February 7, 1903 in Enfield, Halifax, North Carolina, United States. She was a homemaker and housekeeper who was mostly employed in Jewish households, and when she was at home, she ruled her house with love and authority. Wilt's high school coach Cecil Mosison said of her, quote, "When I was in her house, his mother was in charge of everything. She was formidable in a pleasant way," end quote. But more importantly, she was a great mother, and not just a mother to her kids, but to the neighborhood children as well. Lots of people in her neighborhood praised her for her sense of humor and kind-heartedness. She was also a great cook, and having mostly cooked in Jewish homes, her household always smelled of Jewish delicacies. Wilt's favorite meal had to be his mother's chicken and dumplings, as well as apple cobbler for dessert. She also taught her daughters how to cook and knit sweaters for her boys. Olivia had actually been the one to sew Wilt's first basketball jersey when he started playing high school basketball for Overbrook. But as Wilt grew taller, his uncles started tailoring all his pants. A friend of Wilt, Marty Hughes, said of Olivia Chamberlain, quote, "If we were going to a movie or a game, we met at his house. Mrs. Chamberlain was like another mother to the neighborhood kids. It was a very strong, very together family." End quote. But in her warmth, she also didn't tolerate any BS, and according to Wilt's sister Barbara, she was the only person Wilt feared out of probably everybody, but probably the person he also loved the most. Remember when we said Wilt's parents moved to California to be with Wilt before his dad died? Well, Wilt had an apartment on the uppermost floor in his house, and he and his mother used to jump from his apartment into their pool. That's not a joke, man. Barbara also confirmed this, quote, "He would jump off the roof on top of the garage or jump from one barn across to another. He had no fear. When we lived in California, he had the highest apartment in the building we built, and he would jump off that building and go into the pool. My mom would do it with him, and she had to be 60 at the time." End quote. Dude, that is insane. But that was the kind of fearlessness Olivia had raised her kids with. It goes to show how brave and strong she had been, which is why illness was her only enemy. When she fell sick during the 1980s, she went back to California to stay with 5 of her children, including Wilt, who had retired long ago in 1973. She was sick for a while and bedridden, and because she loved eating fish so much, Wilt bought different species of fish and tried to feed them to her on her sickbed. She was later taken to the hospital when things got worse, and Wilt, who had been away in Europe, hurried back to her, and as he got to the hospital, he went into the room, and there she died in his arms. She was survived by Wilt and his 8 siblings, Shirley, Wilbert, Barbara Lewis, Oliver, Margaret Lane, Selena Gross, Dolores Johnson, and Yvonne. Not much is known about Wilt's siblings, but over the years, 7 of them have passed on, leaving just Barbara and Selena currently alive. But what Wilt's siblings did for a living is mostly a mystery, and I'm not going to go into that. Nevertheless, they were known to be very hardworking children who worked to support the family by buying stuff like furniture. Growing up, they were all very close. Quote, "Our parents made us stay connected, especially when we were younger," Barbara recalled. But Wilt was closest to his younger sister Barbara, his junior by 1 year. You might be able to guess that from all of the quotes that we've gotten from her so far. There is more documentation of what Barbara did and said than any of Wilt's other siblings. Barbara Lewis and her brother Wilt became as close as twins practically after he fell sick as a child because he couldn't go to school for a whole year and he was held back in 4th grade with Barbara. Together they stayed in the same class until finishing high school, and that breeded a lot of closeness. Wilt was very protective of Barbara, and even when she became close to a guy named Marty, Wilt didn't trust him, or any other person for that matter, to drive his baby sister to school. Marty did become Barbara's boyfriend, and Wilt was ending up being cool with that, but still, he insisted on driving his sister around, even to prom. The two of them were extremely close, Wilt and Barbara that is. They did almost everything together except play basketball. Wilt, who never liked basketball at first, enjoyed running more than anything else, especially with his sister Barbara, who recalls at the time, quote, "He'd take my hand and with both of us running, make me practice. He made me do a lot of things because he was fearless. He would run and run at Haddington, a nearby recreation center, until it came time for the track team." End quote. And all that running paid off. Wilt had been the best runner in class among the boys, and Barbara the best among the girls, but if the entire class had a race, Wilt would come up first, and his beloved sister second. Barbara also had first-hand knowledge of how Wilt grew from skinny and frail to his jacked figure we all know and love. She remembers how Wilt had been motivated by Charles Atlas advertisements commonly seen in magazines back then. For fear of being bullied like the guy in the Atlas ads, Wilt bought all the products he needed from the brand and went to work every day on his body. And according to Barbara, he would have probably died without it. Quote, "He would do squats and bends with milk bottles, he built up that upper body, and he would never stop exercising even when he was sick. He would have died sooner if he hadn't done all that exercise." End quote. Barbara was also present to witness the first time her brother dunked a ball. She said of that day, quote, "Someone threw the ball to him so fast. He was by the wall, and in order to get the ball in the hoop, he dunked it." Well, that was the beginning of the Wilt Chamberlain story. Everybody just went crazy because nobody had ever seen anybody dunk, and he didn't mean to dunk. There was nowhere else to go, so he dunked it. End quote. But after Wilt left Philly for Kansas to get a degree and play college basketball, Barbara didn't accompany him. She stayed back in Philly to attend business school at night while working during the day. And because of this, she never saw her brother play for the Kansas Jayhawks in person. She could only listen on the radio as her brother destroyed college records and jumped his way to the top of every headline. And standing 7 foot 1 inch tall, it wasn't difficult for Wilt to achieve. Because of his height, Barbara called Wilt Dip or Dippy, and so did the rest of the family because he had to dip to get through a door.
And they called him Dip because he had to dip through the door when he went in.
People had never seen anyone as tall as Wilt.
Barbara would later marry one of Wilt's friends, and it wasn't Marty Hughes, it was Elsie Lewis, who first stayed with the Chamberlains. Lewis would actually play basketball with Wilt with the Harlem Globetrotters, the famous American exhibition basketball team. For Wilt, Lewis wasn't the only friend that became family though, there were a lot of others. Growing up, Wilt had lots of friends but shared a special connection with 4 guys: Marty Hughes, Tommy Fitzhugh, Howard Biddy Johnson, and Vince Miller. A connection strengthened further through their love of basketball. Their connection was strong as steel. They did literally everything together. I'm talking attending elementary, middle school, and high school together, spending time at Haddington Recreation Center, and playing high school basketball at the same school. Again, together. They also worked together in Philly in the kitchen of Camp Fine Forest in 1952. One of them, Marty Hughes, spoke of that time in Robert Cherry's book, quote, "We'd wake up at 5 in the morning and his mother would make a big breakfast for us. We'd leave his house at 6:30 and he already had everything mapped out. We'd go through the neighborhood, he'd collect the money, then we'd go back to his house where his mother made us another big meal and he'd divide the money. To me, he was like a big brother, even though we were the same age. He was always the leader." End quote. Wilt would also try to get his buddies scholarships into college, but he couldn't. This was something he regretted he couldn't do for his friends, but according to Tom Fitzhugh, though they fit the height criterion and hooped well, they were not academically sound for the scholarship. He was quoted as saying, quote, "None of us were academically prepared, including me," end quote. So while his closest buddies couldn't join him in the NBA, Wilt would develop an unusual relationship with an NBA legend and his rival, Bill Russell. So in the video we did about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, we mentioned how Wilt Chamberlain became sort of a mentor to Kareem, and they were good friends for a while, but eventually they turned into bitter enemies. And something similar, but not exact, actually happened between Wilt and Bill Russell. They started off as arch rivals, and the truth is, if anybody should hate Bill Russell more than anyone else, it probably would have to be Wilt. And you know why? Because in the 8 times the two met in the playoffs, Russell's Celtics won 7 times. Chamberlain switched between the 76ers, Lakers, and Warriors, and every time except for one, he lost. Russ also won 11 championships while Wilt only had 2. That has gotta hurt. I mean, these guys even fought on the court, literally. It happened in 1966 when the Celtics played the 76ers in the Eastern Conference Finals. That was the level of competitiveness between the two of them, but even in this rivalry, they managed to nurture an enviable bond. They spent a lot of time together with Russ, often going to his house to eat, and then whooping his butt on the court the next day.
I mean, he'd come past my house on Thanksgiving because we played Philly ball all the time, sleep in my bed, eat the food, sleep in my bed, and go out there and whip my butt. You understand? And my mother would say, "No, we shouldn't feed Bill so well the next time."
But then something happened that tore the two apart for 2 decades. In Game 7 of the 1969 NBA Finals between the Lakers and the Celtics, Wilt was injured and had to sit out the remainder of the game. Russell wasn't happy about this because he thought his friend had chickened out of what was supposed to be a monumental game for him. That is, Bill Russell's last game in the NBA. Russ won his 11th championship that day, but still, he wasn't happy with Wilt. In Wilt's defense, he said he did try to come back into the game, but his coach Butch Van Breda wouldn't allow him to. In his memoir, Second Wind, Bill Russell stated, quote, "Wilt's leaving was like a misspelled word at the end of a cherished book. My anger at him that night caused great friction between us," end quote. But before Wilt died in 1999, he and Russ reconciled, were close friends again, and even did a lot of funny interviews together.
Boys on this team who would come out to do some different other things. They had a pretty nasty team at times just then. But I
That was no accident.
People would from time to time call me a loser. Well, you know, if I'm a loser, then damn near everybody else who was playing was seeing that they won.
So I don't know about you guys, but legitimately this is probably one of my favorite family stories ever so far, and we just want to give a huge shout out to Robert Cherry and his book Wilt Larger Than Life, because man, that book is chock full of interesting and shocking details about Wilt and his family that our writing team never would have found anywhere else. Wilt seemed to have had quite a huge family that wasn't limited to his blood alone, and he might have grown up being seen as a freaky and ugly child, unfairly so, but his support system was not just as solid as a rock, but as abundant as the color green in a forest. With a supportive and hard-working father, a strong and loving mother, a sister like no other, and friends who had his back, Wilt's physique wasn't the only dominating thing in his arsenal. What more could he have asked for? But this is where things start getting really interesting. This is where Wilt started to face backlash for his choice of lifestyle. With the kind of loving and extensive family he had, I mean, surely you could think that he'd want to start something for himself. But that just wasn't the Wilt way. When it came to love and commitment, Wilt would not be his father's son. Wilt never really had a reputation with the ladies in high school, but that would all of course change, and that would become what he was most infamous for. In high school, his friends recall that he had no girlfriend and was likely a virgin until college. Speaking about this, Tom Fitzhugh offered, quote, "Wilt never had a girl in high school. He was a freak as far as girls were concerned. He was probably a virgin when he came out of high school. But after that time, he became a sex monster of sorts, a ladies' man, and the symbol of promiscuity. And to solidify these titles, he wrote in his second autobiography, A View from Above, that he had slept with 20,000 women. This claim caused a lot of trouble in the news, and Wilt faced multiple backlashes from several fronts especially feminists and American conservatives. He was criticized for his promiscuity, his disrespect to women for seeing them as just numbers, and his overall immorality. In response to apparently sleeping with 20,000 women, Wilt was quoted as saying, "I'm not boasting. I don't see all this lovemaking as any kind of conquest." Then he added, "The point of using the number, 20,000, was to show that sex was a great part of my life as basketball was a great part of my life. That's the reason I was single." End quote. He further added that he isn't endorsing promiscuity.
5 years, no, I am definitely not endorsing promiscuity. I'm talking about also, remember, an era.
And he even admitted that he was sorry for the way that huge number came out, and he apologized, especially to the women close to him.
Are you sorry, though, in a way that it came out the way it did?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that question. I'm sorry it did because it took away from some other parts of the book, but I'm more sorry because there's apology owed by me to the women that I've known and the women that I do know, that they were never meant to be a number, and that's how a lot of people are taking.
So basically, Wilt claims it was more like a figure of speech to point out the fact that sex rules the world. Besides, before the end of the chapter in this book where he talked about sleeping with 20,000 women, he wrote that it was better if a man slept with one woman 1,000 times. This is something he tried to elaborate on every time he was asked about his 20,000 women comment.
Found now that having one woman 1,000 different times is really the way to go. But nobody
cared about this part. Some thought he was just trying to salvage the situation or do damage control. His close friends and family, on the other hand, supported him and said the 20,000 women statement was a way to create controversy and help sell his book. Which is probably the truth, honestly. But what do you think about this? Do you think he made up the 20,000 number? Do you think he was wrong to have slept with so many women? Do you think it was fine as long as it was consensual? What do you think? While you answer that, there are some of his friends who offered their theories as to why the giant never got married based on their experiences with him. The theories usually had something to do with Wilt's reluctance to change his lifestyle, but one of his friends and a doctor to Wilt's mother actually, Dr. Stan Lorber, provided another notion. Quote, "Wilt and I discussed the subject of marriage time and time again. There were several women he thought about marrying, but for whatever reason they were not available, and then part of his reluctance related to the fact that he didn't want to change his lifestyle." End quote. Nevertheless, Wilt had also pranked Dr. Stan one day when he called to tell his friend that he was getting married in the coming weekend. But knowing who his friend was, the doctor needed to clarify, so he called Wilt's mother and her response was, "Pshaw, man, he's not going to get married. He's too much in love with himself." Then Cy Goldberg, his friend for more than 40 years, said of Wilt's perpetual singleness, "Wilt told me there was somebody, the actress Kim Novak, he was really into in the 60s. When somebody would ask him if he were going to marry, he usually had a story that went something like this. I'm looking for a rich Jewish girl, and when I find her, I'm going to marry. And there were times when he would say to me, I found this one or that one, but it was always a gag." End quote. As for his dear sister Barbara, she confirmed that her brother didn't want any committed relationship because he wanted to be able to travel as much as he desired and to just be free and do whatever he wanted. But even with all the women he slept with, you'd think that maybe he would have an illegitimate son or two, but there was never any announcement of that until after his death. In Robert Cherry's biography, Wilt, there was no mention of women claiming to be pregnant with Wilt. No talk of an illegitimate child, nothing. He apparently played it safe and secure until one guy by the name of Aaron Levi, who Sports Illustrated did a documentary on in an attempt to trace his biological connections with the NBA legend. The video revealed that Aaron, who grew up without parents, was able to trace his biological mother, Elizabeth, and she confirmed that she had a brief relationship with Wilt Chamberlain. She didn't remember what happened on the nights that they were together, though. But she remembered telling Wilt about being pregnant, and she said his response was, well, he kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, so I'm gonna have a kid out there, huh?" And that was about it. When Aaron reached out to Wilt's sister Barbara for a sample to confirm with a DNA test, he didn't get any response. He tried with the older sister Selena Gross, and she told him to never contact her again. Selena and Barbara, as we said, are the only surviving siblings of Wilt, so Levi's options were quite limited. Wilt reportedly loved kids and had donated millions to children's causes, so it makes me wonder what he did after Elizabeth told him about having his child. Maybe he was just okay with kids when they didn't bear his name, or maybe he didn't believe Elizabeth. Whatever the reason is, Levi wants nothing else but to know who his real father is. But there is one NBA legend who wants nothing to do with his father whatsoever, and you can check out that family video here.